This grizzly bear drags Colin Dowler off his bike and starts eating him alive. What kind of person does it take to not only survive such a brutal attack, but also come out of it with a newfound sense of confidence and strength? Join me as we explore Dowler's harrowing experience and discover the incredible human spirit that allowed him to emerge from the jaws of death. Colin Dowler had always been an adventurous person, enjoying skiing, mountain biking, hiking, climbing, and other physical activities at the age of 44, soon to be 45. As July 2019 drew near, Colin took a week off from his Vancouver job and resolved to do something he had been putting off for a long time in honor of his upcoming birthday. For the past 2 days, Colin and his brother Paul had scoured the terrain of Mount Dougie Dowler, searching for the optimal climbing route up the southwestern British Columbia peak. Standing at approximately 6,500 feet, the mountain's distinctive shape resembled that of a cowboy hat or a dog's tooth. However, for Colin and Paul, the mountain held a deeper significance as it was named after their beloved late grandfather. Despite his familial connection, no one in their family had yet achieved the feat of climbing to the summit of Mount Dougie Dowler. Colin was determined to change that. Jennifer was apprehensive about her husband's latest plan. While she was accustomed to Dowler embarking on solo adventures, this time he intended to sail to a remote bay, cycle on an uninhabited road, trek through grizzly bear territory, and spend the night alone in the wilderness. The potential for disaster seemed too high. "If I'm not back by 8 o'clock on Monday evening, then you can begin to worry," he quipped. Jennifer laughed, knowing that this was practically her husband's catchphrase. The evening prior to his expedition, Colin packed his bag sparingly. He abandoned his usual tent and instead opted to test out a bivy sack, a portable shelter that accommodated a single person. He filled the remaining pockets of his backpack with a handheld GPS, hiking poles, his homemade venison pepperoni, and a few other necessities. In place of his usual Swiss Army knife, he carried a 3-inch stainless steel pocket knife gifted to him by his father. On July 28, 2019, Colin Dowler bid farewell to his wife and daughter and embarked on his solo scouting mission. As a seasoned adventurer, Colin felt confident that he could handle whatever challenges lay ahead. Setting out at 7 a.m., Colin arrived at Ramsey Arm, an inlet on the mainland accessible by boat. After spotting a logging camp nearby, Dowler decided to pay the workers a visit to inform them of his presence on the mountain. It was there that he met Vito Gianandrea, the camp's cook, who kindly offered Dowler a can of bear spray and a ride closer to the mountain. With gratitude and goodbyes exchanged, Colin embarked on his adventure. Having previously worked in the logging industry, Colin knew it was customary to check in at the mess hall. "Is there anything you need?" Vito Gianandrea, the camp cook, inquired. "Bear spray," replied Dowler. After acquiring a can, Vito offered him a ride part of the way. They drove along an overgrown logging road until the forest became too dense. As Colin leaned his mountain bike against the bush, Vito snapped a photo of him with his phone. "So we have something to put on the milk cartons if you don't come home," he jested. Colin Dowler rode his trusty mountain bike through the rugged backcountry, marking his trail with ribbons as he went. Somewhere along the way, he realized his can of bear spray was missing from his pocket. Though concerned, the encroaching darkness and the risks involved in retracing his steps meant that Dowler had to prioritize his safety and find a spot to camp for the night. Before settling in, he made sure to string his food and clothes up in a nearby tree to deter any bears from coming too close. The following day, July 29th, Dowler resumed his scouting mission and eventually began his descent down the mountain, retracing his steps in the hope of finding the missing bear spray. However, despite his best efforts, the canister remained elusive. Colin reluctantly continued his journey without the added layer of protection, hoping that he wouldn't encounter any dangerous wildlife. But fate had other plans. Before we move on to the unexpected attack, I would appreciate it if you give this video a like and subscribe to our channel. Let's move on to the unexpected attack. As Colin pedaled down the mountain, he caught sight of a marker indicating that the logging camp was roughly 4 miles away. Pressing on, he suddenly spotted a male grizzly bear watching him from a distance, causing him to freeze in place. The bear was only 100 feet away, far too close for comfort. In a panic, Dowler attempted to devise a plan to to avoid a confrontation with the animal. Speaking loudly to the bear, he tried to keep it at bay, repeatedly addressing it as, "Hey, bear." Turning his back on the creature was not an option, as he feared it could pounce on him in an instant. However, before Colin could make a decision on his next move, the grizzly made the decision for him. Without warning, the grizzly began to approach Colin Dowler. Despite his efforts to avoid provoking the bear, the animal continued its advance toward him. As the distance between them diminished, Dowler found it increasingly difficult to remain composed. His nerves fraying. Although he was aware that unprovoked bear attacks were rare, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease. He had done nothing to antagonize the animal, but it seemed intent on getting closer. To protect himself, Dowler dismounted from his bike and placed it between himself and the bear. He removed his backpack and retrieved one of his hiking poles, preparing for the worst. The creature loomed over him, its enormous head a daunting sight. Dowler breathed a sigh of relief when the bear passed by him, thinking that he had escaped danger. However, his relief was short-lived as the bear suddenly turned around and locked eyes with him. In an attempt to ward off the animal, Dowler raised his hiking pole and poked the bear's head. The tactic worked initially, but things quickly took a turn for the worse when the pole slipped from Dowler's grip. Enraging the grizzly, the two engaged in a spontaneous tug-of-war over the pole, with both man and animal struggling to gain control. With a sudden lunge, the grizzly bear attacked, clamping its massive jaw onto Colin Dowler's abdomen and back. The pain was excruciating, and he felt warm blood flowing out of his wounds. The sensation was surreal. The bear then lifted him up like a rag doll and carried him about 50 feet away to the edge of the road, dropping him in a ditch. The grizzly's attack continued with relentless ferocity. It bit into Dowler's abdomen and back, followed by an attack on his arm. Despite his fear and desperation, Dowler attempted to defend himself by hooking his fingers and attempting to gouge the bear's eyes, but his efforts were unsuccessful. The grizzly became even more enraged, swinging Dowler around and biting down hard on his left leg, then biting down repeatedly, inflicting more wounds on the helpless man. Dowler refused to give up. He couldn't let himself be killed by the bear and leave his family behind. With a newfound surge of courage, he fought back, trying to force the animal's jaws apart. He could feel the bear's hot saliva dripping from its yellowed teeth. Despite his efforts, the grizzly persisted in its attack, snarling and biting down on him. As the bear moved on to sample his other leg, Colin recalled the knife tucked away in his pocket. However, as he reached for it, the grizzly chomped down on a nerve, causing Colin to writhe in agony and cry out. In a desperate attempt to save himself, he considered playing dead. Yet, as the bear gnawed on another leg nerve, Colin let out an even more piercing scream. "I can't play dead while I'm screaming. I have to get the knife," he thought. The bear's weight bore down on Colin's stomach, and his chest pinned both of his arms to his left side, away from where the knife was located. With all his might, Colin squirmed his left hand through their bodies and into his pocket, retrieving the knife and opening its blade. Inadvertently, he sliced the bear's chest while freeing his left arm. Colin rapidly and forcefully stabbed the bear's neck, causing blood to spurt from the wound. Even the grizzly appeared taken aback by the sudden attack. After the grizzly finally walked away and vanished into the forest, Dowler used his knife to cut his shirt sleeve and wrapped it tightly around his badly injured left leg. Despite feeling weak, he managed to mount his bike and start moving. However, it didn't take long for him to lose his balance and fall down. But Dowler refused to give up, knowing that time was of the essence if he wanted to make it out alive. Dowler mounted his bike again and began pedaling, determined to reach the logging camp. After 30 grueling minutes of riding, he finally arrived at the camp. The logging crew, who had been given the bear spray and a ride by the man just a few hours earlier, sprang into action. Fortunately, they were all trained in first aid, and their combined efforts likely saved Dowler's life. The air ambulance arrived after about 40 minutes and airlifted the injured man to safety. After undergoing a 6.5-hour surgery and receiving 200 staples and stitches, Dowler was no longer in danger. Although his recovery was slow, it was promising. In 2021, 2 years after the attack, he gave an interview with which he said that his physical recovery was still ongoing. Despite this, Dowler preferred to focus on the positive aspects of the event, saying, "I choose to focus on how awesome it is that I survived. I am comfortable being the badass guy who took on a grizzly bear with only a pocket knife.